We are what we are. I keep saying we are who we are because it's a translation from somos loke, as we are what we are, which is best described. If you see it on the poster, it says, does for cannibals what Let the Right One In did for vampires, which isn't actually what it does at all. It's a very strange, gore-inflected art movie that begins with a guy dying in a street. We then find his family bereft, but also now having to move on generationally, and they have a dark ritualistic secret which is at the heart of their family, which turns out to be that they are a cannibal family for reasons which are, depending on how much you want to read into the backstory of the film, the reasons are either completely unexplained or are all there if you're searching for the clues. Essentially, it's this strange, weirdly twisted, incestuous family who obviously owe a debt to the family from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in which all the different sides of the characters in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre essentially represent different facets of the legend of Ed Gein. So it's the idea of the urban...
What's that about then?
Well, you know Ed Gein, the Wisconsin Ghoul?
No.
Okay, Ed Gein, the Wisconsin Ghoul, who was a famous criminal, he was a grave robber and necrophile, who was the inspiration for Robert Bloch's story Psycho, that was then obviously the basis of the Hitchcock Psycho. But his character reoccurs throughout horror cinema, most significantly, I think, after that Deranged, obviously, but in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So what you're talking about is like this weird, twisted urban family, incestuous urban family with this dark cannibalistic secret, who then have to move on a generation. Somebody else has then become the head of the family, and they then have to go out and find food for themselves. And the whole tone of the movie is this really sort of strange and often very, very upsetting juxtaposition between, on the one hand, something that would vaguely approach social realism, real characters in real situations. On the other hand, has this horrible dark heart, which is clearly not supernatural, incidentally, which is why the whole thing about does for cannibals what Let the Right One In does for vampires is off. In fact, much better touchstones in understanding the film would be, for example, obviously Martin, the George Romero film, which is about, is he a vampire, isn't he a vampire? No, actually what he is somebody who believes he's a vampire and is delusional in his vampirism. Or that Spanish film, The Hours of the Day, which is a serial killer movie, which in many ways sort of pre-echoes this in terms of its languid tone and its very strange shift between, on the one hand, very boring realism, and on the other hand, these sort of scenes of extreme aberration. I think you'd have to say that you have to warn people in advance that the tone of the film is not entirely unified. It's very, very slow, very slow, very, very, very slow. Now that clearly,
how slow?
It's slow. It's we're going to track through this market for
Is this Gregorian chant?
Well, yes. Actually, funnily enough, the pacing of it is not unlike the pacing of Gregorian chant. Obviously done deliberately, which means that the build-up is very, very slow, which means that you get to meet the characters in a way which is an awful... And there are occasions at the beginning where I have to say patience is required for that, building towards a sort of a finale which is deranged and obviously hints towards much more explicit gore cinema, but does so in a way that will I think, genuinely... alarm and upset somebody. So it's pitched oddly between the grindhouse aesthetic and the art house market, which is an area which I'm quite interested in. And at its best, as I said, it owes a debt to films like Hours of the Day, because it has that strange off-kilter quality that you're watching real people, but they're real people tied up in some horrible, guilty, awful secret that has somehow turned them from people into monsters, and their monstrousness is just on the edge of human rationality. It is a tough film. It is a quite extraordinary in some respects. There are certain scenes in it that are quite breathtaking. There are other things in which you think, okay, this hasn't quite followed itself through. I don't think it's the masterpiece that some people have said, but I think it is, without wishing to give this away, it is clearly the film of the week, because there are things in it that make you think, well, there's an aesthetic sense there. There's somebody has really thought hard about how to do this. I wonder entirely whether I wonder whether the people who are ready for the gore will be ready for the langures, and the people who are ready for the art will be ready for the gore. But if you can go in with an open mind and stick with it through the opening sequences, which some of which are, I think, although I said the same thing about Hours of the Day, and I did stick with that, and I would happily watch it again. So it is the film of the week.
Are there more blunt instruments than in your average Gregorian charm?
There's lots of clocks. There's a massive amount of clocks, because one of the things that the film is about the way in which the family, are obsessively devoted to ritual of timekeeping, ritual of, having to continue this awful cannibalistic ritual, which it seems is somehow based in some hideous, guilty secret, which may be completely natural or may be something else.